In this module, we're going to turn to Descartes' last and most powerful skeptical argument, what's often called the evil demon argument. The evil demon argument is given, for instance, in paragraph 12 of Meditation 1. But I will suppose then, not that deity who is sovereignly good and a fountain of truth, but that some malignant demon, who is once exceedingly potent and powerful, has employed all his artifice to deceive me. So the idea here is that, well, with the argument from illusion, as well as the argument from dreaming, there still remained this basis of a connection to the world through sensation that allowed for some elements to escape the skeptical argument. So there was always something that remained, whether it was colors and smells and shapes and animals and so on in the dreaming argument, or a much larger percentage of your sensory experiences in the argument from illusion. Descartes says, now what I'm going to do is instead suppose that the world isn't the cause of any of my experiences from sensation. Now they're indistinguishable because all of my experiences are exactly as they were before. There is no difference between this story that I'm telling myself now and my experiences in this story and the way I thought the world unfolded in my everyday life up to this point. So everything is exactly the same, but in a way that I cannot detect, it has all been rendered an illusion, a deceit. So the idea here is if instead of the world causing my sensory experiences, there is in fact another creature, a surrogate, an evil and malicious creature who systematically creates in my sensory experiences nothing but falsehood and misstatement and deceit, so that no aspect of any of my experiences is in any way indicative of the real world. No judgment I could make about those experiences could give me any insight into the nature of the world, precisely because they've been created to prevent me from doing that. Moreover, there is no means of noticing that, detecting that, seeing that, whether or not this is the way the world really is, or whether or not the world is as I thought it was, is completely impossible for me to determine, he thinks. And this is the power of the evil demon argument. This is why he thinks that it ultimately satisfies his need for an argument to eviscerate all the foundational beliefs, all the judgments about the sensations of ideas that form the foundational elements of his knowledge edifice, and in doing so, eradicating his entire knowledge edifice in virtue of the interconnectedness between them. And so at the end of that first meditation, Descartes is satisfied that he's come up with a scenario, the evil demon scenario. And that scenario simply says, look, I can imagine a world, a different place, where instead of my getting information about the world through sensations, I in fact get nothing but misinformation. And the source of that misinformation is systematically deceiving me about every aspect of every element of reality. And so as a result, I have at least a little bit of a doubt because I can't determine based on my experiences whether or not I'm in evil demon world or world as I understood it. I have a little bit of doubt about my judgments of all of the individual ideas of sensation. Nothing about my sensory experience can't be called into question, even if just a little bit, by the mere possibility of this scenario. That being the case, Descartes thinks, I must withhold assent because of that principle of assent. Right? The principle of assent says, if there's even a chance that I'm wrong, then I should treat it as if I was definitely wrong. I should withhold my assent from that which has an element of doubt just as fervently as I should withhold my assent from what is clearly and obviously wrong. That's how we find the first meditation ending, with the completion of the first project, that negative destructive project. In the second meditation, Descartes now turns his attention to trying to execute and articulate his positive project, the project of rebuilding his knowledge edifice from the ground up in a way that's completely consistent with his framework of epistemology, his principle of assent, and his understanding about the interrelationship between the elements of his knowledge edifice. And so in meditation 2, in paragraph 2, he says, Archimedes, in order that he might draw the terrestrial globe out of its place and transport it elsewhere, demanded only that one point be fixed and immovable. In the same way, I shall have the right to conceive high hopes if I'm happy enough to discover one thing only, which is certain and indubitable. And so now we begin the positive project. And the positive project is to rebuild the knowledge edifice on the basis of clear and distinct judgments such that they cannot be called into question even by the powerful evil demon skeptical argument. And so Descartes comes up with that Archimedean point, that intellectual fulcrum that he thinks will allow him to begin to rebuild his knowledge edifice. And that one piece is summarized in this very famous Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum, which is basically a little bit mistranslated as I think, therefore I am. And so in paragraph 3 of meditation 2, we find Descartes saying, but there is, I know not what being who is possessed at once of the highest power and the deepest cunning, who is constantly employing all his ingenuity in deceiving me. So he reiterates the evil demon scenario. Doubtless then, he says, I exist, since I am deceived. And let him deceive me as he may, he can never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I be conscious that I am something. And so a more accurate translation of cogito ergo sum might be something like I perceive or I experience, therefore I am. And so this is the truth, the intellectual fulcrum point that Descartes identifies. Even the evil demon scenario cannot result in my needing to withhold assent from my judgment that I exist, because even in that scenario, I still exist. The evil demon couldn't deceive me about that, because in order for the scenario to work, I have to exist as well as the evil demon. Otherwise, there is no thing to be deceived. There is no deception at all. And so Descartes thinks at this point he's found his intellectual fulcrum. There's a truth that withstands even the withering argument of the evil demon skeptical argument. And so he tries to proceed forward by contemplating what this one intellectual insight is going to yield for him, how he can build up his belief edifice from it. And so he asks, but what am I then? Well, I'm a thinking thing. That is something that doubts and understands and affirms and denies and wills and refuses and imagines and senses. And so he says, look, I cannot be deceived with my senses or in what I imagine, or what I deny or will or refuse or understand or doubt. I can't be tricked into thinking that I'm not that kind of creature precisely because that's what I'm doing. And so the act of my doing it affirms that that's the sort of creature I am. And so he thinks he gets some insight into the nature of him, that mental stuff.